I'm John Geaver for MedPage Today. The relationships between what kids see in the media and how it changes their behavior is of immense concern to parents, educators, and policymakers. Although there are still major controversies, in some areas a consensus is building. That point is made in a new report sponsored by Common Sense Media, a nonprofit group founded to help children interact safely with mass media. The report, a meta-analysis of 173 published studies, found that for some negative outcomes, obesity, smoking, alcohol and drug use, and poor school performance, the amount of time kids spend watching television, using the internet, and playing video games is a significant risk factor. But one outcome the study didn't look at is violent behavior. Dr. Paul Boxer, a psychologist at Rutgers University, recently completed a study of adolescents in juvenile detention for violent crimes that found they had a strong preference for violent TV shows, movies, and video games relative to law-abiding teens.
We found two sort of fundamental conclusions here. One was that there was a significant relation between violent media preferences and violent behavior in the sample. And also, we observed that relation even after having taken into account a number of other risk factors that are commonly associated with aggressive behavior, such as psychopathology, exposure to neighborhood violence, academic skills, and an orientation towards callousness and unemotionality, what some call psychopathy.
What was novel about the study was that it confirms that kids who were criminally violent, not just who yell and push other kids on the playground, were more exposed to violence in the media.
So that's from Sunday Primetime. The research that's been done already has looked at, for example, laboratory models of aggressive behavior, so the extent to which kids might perform noise blasts or shock an imagined opponent that they're competing against in a laboratory task as one index of aggressive behavior, or field studies where the researchers have measured things like pushing, shoving, getting in trouble with teachers, that sort of thing. What we were looking at, we measured those kinds of behaviors as well, the more common lower level forms of aggression, but we also got information on whether the kids had committed any violent acts, punching someone hard, beating them, choking them, threatening them with a knife or a gun, stabbing them, those sorts of behaviors. So that's one piece of new information, which is that we did find a link between violent media preferences and that kind of behavior, which had not been documented previously.
One finding in the Common Sense Media study was that the literature on other types of unhealthy behaviors and outcomes has focused more on the duration of media exposure than on its specific content. It concluded that we still don't know which is more important. Dr. Boxer said that's not the case when it comes to aggressive and violent behavior.
There's clearly been the observation in the literature that individuals who have what you might say aggressive predispositions to begin with do over time end up preferring violent media more than other forms of media. But let me just sort of emphasize 2 points about the literature on the violent media research. The experimental evidence is very clear that within the constraints of an experimental design, violent media exposure does seem to cause aggressive responses more so than does neutral media, or than do the neutral media forms of exposure. And from the longitudinal research that's been done by some of my colleagues as well as some others, there does seem to be this effect that over time, earlier exposure to violent media does lead to increases in aggressive behavior later on, whereas early aggressiveness does not necessarily lead to an increased preference for violent media. So from the longitudinal data, if you accept the strictures of the longitudinal design, you can also say with some degree of confidence that there appears to be some causality there as well.
Dr. Boxer added that for outcomes like obesity, though, duration of exposure is likely to be more of a factor than the specific content. Either way, the consensus seems to be that many children spend too much time bombarded by electronic images and sounds. Common Sense Media said one answer is for parents to shut off the TV and take their kids out to play. Dr. Boxer said that's a significant challenge when you're talking about adolescents, but it's not necessarily that hard for younger children who may also be more vulnerable.
Parents can only control so much about their kids' lives once the kids get to a certain point where they're showing a lot more autonomy and a lot more independence and a lot more desire to do things out of the confines of their parent supervision. But parents can have from that standpoint, adolescence, it may be more difficult for parents to have that kind of an impact. But certainly one message that someone can take from this kind of research is earlier on in development, when parents do have more of a say and more control over what their kids are able to watch and what their kids are able to do, really, that is a time when parents can start to help to foster more healthy media habits.
I'm John Geaver, MedPage Today.